Today, I will continue with OMC Outboard Motors history. But before I go any further, I would like to invite you to use the subtitles, and if necessary, you can choose automatic translation to your desired language. I also want to thank those of you who have subscribed to the Boat Motors channel and invite those of you who haven't to do so. Special thanks to those of you who support my channel. As you already know from the previous episodes, in 1935, the Outboard Motors Corporation bought the Johnson Motor Company, which already had established overseas markets in China, Burma, Iran, and Albania. This gave Evinrude opportunity to expand its dealerships in Europe and Asia. Another benefit was Johnson's position in the refrigeration market. OMC established the Caille Products Division Galesburg, Illinois, to manufacture this new line. Later the Caille division will participate in outboard production. In parallel with all changes, OMC will start supplying with parts the Canadian company Eaton to manufacture Viking outboard motors. The new business interest brought changes, and in 1936 the company switched its name to the Outboard Marine and Manufacturing Company. Stephen Briggs resigned his OMC chairmanship temporarily to take the Johnson helm. The strict financial supervision and the implemented changes to stabilize the company paid off. In 1937 Johnson was accounted for about 60% of U.S. outboard motor production, and the sales for the same year were $4.3 million. At this moment, the outboard motors produced under the umbrella of OMC have divided into three levels. The Alto line is a budget one. The Evinrude is a prestige, and Johnson is offering special features. Despite the cooperation between them, they were independent and each of them followed its own production program. This left each division to award contracts to outside bidders as well as those sharing a place under the outboard umbrella. Even export sale operations were handled differently. Although they were all routed through the Waukegan headquarters, Johnson tended to sell directly to its dealers, while most of Evinrude sales were passed through distributors and then to the dealers. In addition to the engines, selling mostly in seasonal markets, there were other items broadening the product lines. The Lawnboy lawnmower had been an Evinrude staple since 1932, along with pumps for drainage, firefighting, and lawn spraying. Offerings from Johnson included small generators, a gasoline engine for washing machines, and refrigerators. To keep chronology facts, I want to note that in 1939 the Mercury Outboard Motor Company was established by Carl Kiekhaefer, and it will not take long to become one of the biggest competitors. With the beginning of World War II the outboard facilities were all converted to war production, like munitions, aircraft engines and other equipment, along with landing boat motors for the Navy. In 1941 the last Alto outboard motor was produced, which left only Johnson and Evinrude on the production line. At the end of the World War II, OMC converted its facilities back to the production of Johnson and Evinrude outboard motors. The post-war production is distinguished by many improvements to compete with the new rising companies, some of which have outboard manufacturing experience for other vendors. In 1946 OMC will continue to supplying Eaton with their Viking engines. From 1946 to 1964, the Viking engines were sourced by Caille from the Johnson Canada plant in Peterborough, Ontario. In the same 1946, the Scott Atwater outboard motor appeared on the market. This company has previous experience manufacturing champion outboards for Mr. Dumonte. The new outboards such as Scott Atwater, Mercury, Martin, Corsair, West Bend, Wizard, Majestic, Firestone, Elgin, Commander and many others will emerge on marketplace, which will create pressure over the OMC. In response to the competition in 1949 OMC built the first innovative outboard with remote fuel pressure tank for 10 horsepower Johnson. The new and very sensitive system reduced the weight of the outboard motor and allowed it to make long-distance travels without refueling. 10 years later, the pressure tank will receive changes in the appearance of a new fuel vacuum pump which is dominating today. In the same 1949 Evinrude celebrate the 40th anniversary of outboard motoring. Nearly 16 years after initiating the policy of consolidated competition, in 1952 OMC produced the first standardized common line product. The Evinrude and the Johnson were essentially the same motor, just styled differently for each division. Even their parts were interchangeable. To further integrate the two divisions, OMC pared both the Johnson and Evinrude lines down to 4 models each. At the same time, several acquisitions broadened the outboard product line during the 1950s. The OMC Canada successfully converted an outdated washing machine motor into a lawn mower motor and branches into the rotary lawn mower business. The new mower was added to the Lawn Boy brand. On November 6, 1952, Johnson Motors produced their 1 millionth outboard on the 10-horsepower Seahorse production line. The event was commemorated with a special token. In 1953, the new 10 horsepower is offered as a special edition to celebrate the million motor. If you take a look closely, you can see the Seahorse cast on the motor. In 1952, the RPM Manufacturing Company of Missouri, whose specialty was a rotary power mower, was also brought into the OMC Corporation, which planned to sell their product under its familiar Lawn Boy trade name. Featuring a detachable engine useful as an outboard, the mower was already a best-selling unbranded item in the Sears catalog. Outboard coped with the huge volume of existing orders by completing entire units in one factory, rather than using the more time-consuming method of piecemeal assembly in several locations. Around this same time, the Korean War began. President Harry Truman declared state of emergency in the U.S. and called for a large-scale production effort from major manufacturers. The National Production Authority, NPA, formerly called the War Production Board, decided once again that aluminum could not be used in the production of recreational items. The proposed ban on production would divert 90% of aluminum to defense purposes, leaving only 10% to be used to build outboard motors. Joseph Rainiac, who had been named general manager of OMC in 1950, went to Washington to fight the ban. In his pamphlet, Outboards at Work, Rainiac showed the NPA that outboard motors were being used domestically for important commercial purposes such as logging, fishing, water taxi services, disaster relief and conservation. Rainiac convinced the NPA that Johnson and Evinrude motors were the only ones being used for such purposes. Much to their surprise, the NPA cancelled the ban on production for OMC and even offered to assist the company in securing more aluminum. With this remarkable turn of events, OMC had only 10% to supply of its production capacity to the war effort. Amidst expansion of their facilities, OMC continued to produce revolutionary new products. The 5.5 horsepower Johnson Seahorse featured a carburetor intake silencer and an exhaust relief silencer, making it the quietest motor available. Sales of the quiet Seahorse skyrocketed, setting the highest single-year sales records for any one product in the history of the company. The Seahorse also featured a gear shift with forward, neutral and reverse, an up and off motor hood, and a spring-release shock absorber drive. In 1956, the company changed its name again to Outboard Marine Corporation, keeping the abbreviation OMC. The same year, OMC purchased Industrial Engineering, Canada's largest chainsaw manufacturer. OMC moved this new subsidiary to Peterborough, Ontario, and changed the name Industrial Engineering to Pioneer Saws. Cushman Company of Nebraska joined the OMC subsidiary list in 1957. Well known in the utility vehicle field, Cushman had manufactured the Airborne, a motor scooter dropped by parachute for ground transport of paratroopers in World War II. Later the company's lightweight vehicles became popular for agricultural, industrial, and recreational use. He new acquisition added three-wheel mail carriers, golf carts, and motor scooters to the OMC product line. Besides the Johnson and Evinrude motors then being sold by about 7,000 retail dealers, the growing list of OMC offerings included Caille Buccaneer motors sold through hardware stores, as well as a number of unbranded models sold for retailers. On October 4, 1957, the first artificial satellite was launched into Earth's orbit by the Soviet Union. The Iron Curtain has already descended across the world. Even though it looks like this is the beginning of the innovative competition, everything has started years ago. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first cosmonaut. 8 years later, on July 20, 1969, the U.S. moon mission Apollo 11 will success. The world has begun to live in a space fiction era. Every magazine will show drawings of the future. The boats and outboards will look strange, the car design will receive heavy loaded ornaments with fin tails and promises for nuclear power engines. The buildings and highways will be drawn with strange futuristic forms. Years later, only part of these visions will turn to reality. At that time, the American dream was reachable. Most of the American families have affordable housing, reliable transportation, and secured jobs. The weekends used to belong to the families with different activities. Boating, fishing, and camping was on weekly basis. In response to new needs and OMC evolution, the most innovative engine appeared in 1958. The first mass-produced die-cast aluminum engine. It was a 4-cylinder, 50-horsepower outboard, completely manufactured by OMC. Its V-blocks came from Johnson, its steel parts from Evinrude, while the Caille division contributed its carburetors and ignition systems. As the 1960s began, the United States was in the trough of a short recession. First-time buyers as well as those seeking bigger and better leisure-time equipment put their purchases on hold. Because its principal markets were tied to leisure-time activities mostly practiced on a seasonal basis, OMC sales sank. Taking the next logical step of overseas production, the company was manufacturing and assembling motors in Brugge, Belgium, Europe. The same year, the company's aim was to improve all these products and find growing markets for them. Ensuring its industry leadership by constant innovation and improvement to existing products, OMC allocated more than $7 million annually to research, development, and testing. In 1961, the U.S. branch of the company established the OMC Boats division to produce and market 16 to 19-foot boats featuring both outboard and the newer stern-drive engines. As you can see, I'm trying to follow the growing OMC umbrella and give you the important historical facts. In the next episode, we will follow the development of OMC along with new outboard motors appearing on the U.S. market as well as the Japanese outboard motor invasion. But before we go there, I want to invite those of you who haven't subscribed to the Boat Motors channel yet to do so. Thank you for watching the video.